Hello, and welcome back to Taking a Gander. On this show, we take a gander at a different city or place to see if it's somewhere you might want to travel to in the future. My goal isn't to make a top 10 list or definitive travel guide or anything like that. I think generally speaking, most people know what they're into and what they're not. So I just want to give you that kind of vibe check, see what it's like, show you around a little bit, and then you can decide if it's somewhere you like to go. Of course, I'll give my recommendation at the end, but the general idea is it's up to you. So I just want to help you along the way. Today in episode 5, we're talking about Charleston, South Carolina. I'm going to go into why I picked it, a little bit about it, and then I'll tell you some things you should do if you go there. So this one's a little bit special to me because it led to a part of my life that really changed, and it started out with the first time I ever went here. So my cousin and I both met in Myrtle Beach, which is just up here, kind of on the northern end of the coast of South Carolina. We rented a car, and her and I drove all the way from Myrtle Beach down to Savannah. And we spent a couple days in Savannah and worked our way back up to Myrtle Beach, and of course spent some time in Charleston as well. It was such a special trip and such a memorable thing that a couple years later I actually moved to Savannah. So that will show you how much I like the area. Now, Savannah and Charleston are two different cities, but not to discount Charleston, I loved it as well. There are specific reasons why I chose Savannah over Charleston, but needless to say, this area is great. It's really special to me. It's, like I said, somewhere I've lived, somewhere I hold near and dear. And actually, my love for Savannah is why I started making videos in the first place on YouTube, so this is a little bit special. I think when it comes to the South and areas like this, I think people kind of put the South in one bucket. But in fact, if you zoom out, the South is really a lot of different things. I mean, people in Nashville will consider themselves in the South. Texas, part of the South. But Nashville and Texas are quite a bit different than places like Georgia or South Carolina. And in fact, a very small area here, if you zoom in, what they call the Low Country, is kind of this region here around Charleston and Savannah. I think technically Savannah is not part of it because Low Country is like a South Carolina thing, but Savannah happens to be just on the border there. So most of this area has this kind of general coastal feel that I think is really, really cool. My wife and I had moved out of Savannah before we got married, but later when we decided to actually get married, we're like, we want to go back to that area and have our wedding there. So we picked Hilton Head, which is in South Carolina, close to Charleston, and we had a low country themed wedding, which was really special for us. And of course, another reason why I picked Charleston is it's a pretty obvious one. I mean, if you go to a lot of travel sites, I just picked the US News here, they have a pretty cool travel section. You'll see that number one place to visit in the Carolinas, Charleston. So it's really popular. You can search Charleston Awards and you're going to see all kinds of different lists of like best places to visit in America, best cities to travel to. Charleston's going to be up there for a lot of different reasons. So I thought, hey, let me hit this one. It's special to me. I want to pass this one on to everyone else. So as we get into Charleston here, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. First of all, this area here, which is downtown Charleston, is called locally the Peninsula, and that's the main area I'm going to focus on today. I think if you were going to travel there, most people are going to find themselves in that area, at least for a majority of their trip. There's a few things outside of it that I'll point out, but generally speaking, the Peninsula is like the hot spot of where to go and downtown. It's also not only the oldest city in South Carolina, but it's the largest one as well, so pretty notable in that sense. I was actually looking into some of the population numbers here, and I thought this was super interesting. From around 1920 to around 1980, the population basically didn't change. I mean, it went up and down a little bit here and there. You see like minus 14%, plus 11%. So they had some big changes. But generally speaking, I mean, it had 67,000, call it 68,000 people in 1920. And then by 1980, it wasn't even to 70,000 yet. So it stayed kind of around that range for a really long time. However, since then, in the 90s through today, the population has grown a lot, which is really cool. They're actually the 174th largest city in the US, so not huge, but definitely way bigger than it was before, with about 150,000 people, similar to like Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital of Mississippi, so pretty good there. And as a metropolitan area, 74 comes in. Again, it's actually the 74th largest metropolitan area, which is funny because just above it is Columbia, South Carolina. Charleston is a bigger city, but Columbia is a bigger metro. They're generally similar in size in both regards. I noticed something else that stuck out about Charleston to me when I was looking at the numbers. With that population growth, at the same time, there was a dramatic drop in crime. So I think those things play a role. I know the Peninsula and King Street in particular, which we'll get into a little bit, wasn't always the nicest or safest area. Today, if you go there, it certainly doesn't feel that way. So I think those things correlate with each other. Drop in crime, kind of some gentrification, if you will, so people find a desire to move into Charleston that maybe wasn't there before. You're going to find in downtown Charleston, in this area here, which we're going to cover a lot today, that the architecture is really, really beautiful. There's a lot of old buildings that have been preserved really well, which is really nice to see. You'll see a lot of buildings with both British and French influences. A lot of unique looks there. Some of it to me looks like New Orleans. Some of it to me looks like Savannah. Some of it to me looks like New England. It's kind of all over the place, but it's really, really pretty. There's also some touches of West African culture here as well, because slave trade was part of Charleston's history, so you're going to see some of that influence as well. So this brings me to one of the main reasons you'd want to visit Charleston, and that's American history. This place is packed with history and important sites, and a lot of it's preserved really well, so you can actually see it firsthand today. I'm not a history expert. I'm not going to try to go into extreme detail here, but I'll give you like a small piece of history and how it plays a role with Charleston and how it's so important and why people travel from all over to see it. South Carolina was actually the first state to secede from the Union before the Civil War, and actually if you look right here across the bay here, this was a very important point here, because in order to get shipping from the city to Europe or any other part along the coast, you'd have to get through this little narrow strait right here. Well, there's an island that's actually a fort right here called Fort Sumter, and Fort Sumter was controlled by the North. So South Carolina seceded and they had this big city, but they didn't have a way to get in and out with this fort in their way. So what they actually did was, from this point here, which is called the Battery, they fired cannons and different kind of like bombardment type stuff to the fort, and 34 hours later they took it over, and that was considered the first shots fired in the Civil War. Coincidentally, this video is coming out on April 13th. It wasn't planned, but it was actually April 12th, 1861 when they fired those shots into April 13th. So this video comes out on the anniversary of that happening. Total coincidence. I didn't plan that at all. Fast forward to the end of the war. Charleston would have been controlled by the Confederates the entire war, and it wasn't until 1865, I believe, when the Union soldiers actually retook Fort Sumter that they were able to regain control, and that was kind of the beginning of the end of the war as well. It's a lot more deep and complex than that, but like I said, just kind of a Cliff Notes version of why this is important. Therefore, you see people who travel here, history buffs, people who are into the Civil War or American history, will definitely want to come and check this place out. So related to the Civil War, of course, is the slave trade, and Charleston was a big place that involved a lot of slave trading, auctions, things like that, terrible things, but it happened here, and there's a lot of that that's preserved here as well. There's one place you can go and you can really see the history. I think it's interesting. It's kind of dark, but it's definitely something worth checking out. And then one other quick thing I just want to mention about Charleston, why it's nice to visit, is the weather, of course. It's really beautiful pretty much all year round. I mean, the winters are mild, the spring and the fall are like perfect. I mean, you definitely want to go in the spring or the fall. Depending on how you are with the heat, the summers might be too hot for you, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, so now that you know a little bit more about Charleston, let's get into some things that you'll want to check out while you're there. The first thing, which is the easy one, it's maybe the most notable thing, is the Pineapple Fountain, which is part of John Riley Waterfront Park right here. This is a pretty notable site. You can start here. I found this one blog. It's called Fueled by Wanderlust. One thing in particular I want to point out is she actually has this map here, and it shows you that this 2-mile, 40-minute walk where you pretty much hit all the main sites. And I can tell you from my list today that we're going to go over that this is really good. I mean, this is pretty much everything you want to see, and it is walkable. This is exactly what we did. You might want to add in some stuff over here as well for shopping and restaurants, but we can get into that. But as far as like the main like tourist sites, this is a really good route right here that you could take. So jumping over to TripAdvisor, you see here, number one thing to see, it's this waterfront park. It's not huge or anything like too crazy, but of course the buildings around it are really pretty. I think the areas here, all these sites kind of blend together a little bit, like Rainbow Row, which we'll talk about in a second. I guess I can get into it now. Rainbow Row is a very famous row of houses that's really close to here. They're private residents and people just, live there. I'm sure they're quite expensive to live in, but they're really nice houses. They're painted interesting, like pastel colors. And anytime you look up like Charleston or Sea Travel Guides, you're definitely going to see pictures of these houses because they're beautiful, it's really cool, it's unique, and this is kind of the start of the walking trip that you can do in this area. And going back over here to TripAdvisor, as I had mentioned, 1 and 2, so really easy. Number 2 is Fort Sumter. So like I said, you can take a ferry over and really get a full tour of it and stuff. It takes a couple of hours. Here's a good look at what to expect from Rainbow Row. Really, really pretty houses. You can see how the colors just change from house to house. Super pretty, nice, beautiful by the water to take a nice walk and stuff like that. Funny story that I can throw in here. So I had visited Charleston the first time with my cousin, but then after, when my wife and I were in Savannah, we came back to visit for the second time that I had been there. Somewhere in this area, I'm not exactly sure where, we found this really nice door with like this stone like curve thing that went over it, and we said, hey, let's take a picture. We posted it on, it was Valentine's Day, so we posted this picture of us kissing under this like really nice like foliage and whatnot. and I think I have the picture here, and I posted this on Instagram, and for some reason, I guess it does look like an engagement photo. We weren't engaged yet, but the whole day and the whole time we were in Charleston, I just kept getting messages from everyone. Congratulations. Oh my God, we're so happy for you guys. And it wasn't an engagement picture at all, but we must have had 20 different people reach out to us that day thinking that it was, which is pretty funny. Charleston is certainly a place that you might want to get engaged. It's very romantic in that sense, very pretty. So kind of taking a look here. So here's the fountain that I mentioned with that waterfront park. Rainbow Rose right here. The next thing you might want to do is all the way at the bottom here, which is called the Battery. And so this is a really cool park, White Point Garden. And basically what this was actually a real military point. I mean, this was used for the military in those conflicts I was talking about during the Civil War. And this wall here, there's like a retaining wall against the water, was actually a stone wall designed for military defense, not just for hurricanes or the weather, but actually to keep incoming armies from being able to get onto the land. So really cool. There's a lot of like statues here, different monuments you can see based on history. There's also some cannons and different types of military equipment that have been preserved and put there, which are pretty cool. So that's all within a few minute walk. I definitely would just recommend doing that all at once, especially in like the spring and summer when it's really nice out. You can have a awesome walk, get some food on the way. Not a bad way to spend your afternoon, I'll tell you that. The next thing you're going to want to hit, it's on the north end up here called Charleston City Market. This is really cool. It's a market that's been around for a really long time. My favorite kind of place. I always talk about the markets. This is a good one. It's a bunch of stalls. It's inside and outside. They've got artwork. They've got postcards. They got a lot of different like food. And here I see fine tea, for example. There's, of course, there's pineapples everywhere. That's like the Charleston, South Carolina thing. Here's a good picture right here. This is what it's like inside. There's also like a little food court there that's got a lot of vendors. So definitely worth checking out. You can see here, established 1807. So it's been around for a long time. And as far as I know, it's been in service the entire time. So definitely you cannot miss this here. Once you finish up at City Market, you'll be really close to King Street. So King Street is kind of the other side of traveling, right? So you had your sightseeing, you had your beautiful stuff, your picture taking, but you want to do some shopping, you want to eat some good food, you want to go to the bar. That's right here on King Street. This area is just, I mean, absolutely top notch. It's lined from end to end with shops, restaurants. There's a lot of really notable restaurants in Charleston, which I'm going to get into a couple of them specifically that I really like, but you could spend all day here. If you're into shopping, oh, look, here's Gucci. I mean, there's just like really high-end stuff, but it's not all high-end stuff, so there's like a little bit of something for everyone. And the street, I mean, you could go up and down. There's people playing music. It's usually really, really busy, and it's a good time for sure. Charleston has built a very solid reputation for like foodies and great restaurants and chefs. I'm going to give a couple recommendations, but I can tell you right now, if you go to like TripAdvisor or something like that, I mean, you're just going to see endless lists of fancy, really great looking restaurants. I obviously haven't been to them all, but you can just see how nice this looks, and one after another of just gorgeous places. And I know people who are like really into the food scene will go to Charleston just to eat at a bunch of fancy places. We went to a couple that I'm going to recommend. The first one, I'm actually wearing their shirt, so I picked one up while I was there. It's called 167 Raw, and this place is a seafood restaurant, and it's so good. The first time I went there with my cousin, it was actually just this really small place. I mean, they had like a bar with maybe like 8 seats that you could sit across, and behind it, not exaggerating if I say there's only 4 tables, it was really, really small, and the wait was like 4 hours or something like that. So we put our name in, and we went all around the whole town, came back, and still had to wait for like another hour. But they served oysters and shrimp, and I think we had some kind of like halibut ceviche thing that was really good. So if you're into seafood, gotta recommend this place. When I came back with my wife a couple years later, they actually opened a full-size restaurant, which was much bigger. So we went there. It was a lot easier to get a seat. Same food, awesome oysters. I think I had a lobster roll that time. That was awesome. So this was one of my favorites. So maybe a few too many oysters and a few too many cocktails. I decided I needed the shirt. So I bought this shirt, one of my only souvenirs from Charleston. I still wear it a lot. It's a comfortable shirt. I got to give them credit there. But overall, that's a great place. The next one is called Husk. So this one here, we went for my cousin's birthday. There's actually a Husk in Savannah as well. So I've been to the one in Savannah a couple times. We went here and it's really good too. We also got like a seafood tower type of thing for her birthday where they do like the crab legs and the oysters and the shrimps. It's all like stacked up and stuff. Really, really good. Both the one in Charleston and Savannah have a feel like you're in a house or in someone's mansion in their dining room, and it's really nice, and the food is very special. I'd highly, highly recommend it. And then like a quick lunch type thing that maybe is a little bit less expensive than these two. There's a place called Brown Dog's Deli. There's 2 of them. We went on a little food tour, and they took us around, and they took us to this place, and it was really good. So I recommend this for just like a quick lunch type thing, sandwich thing, something that's not a seafood tower, if you will. I want to make a couple other quick recommendations. I'll just rattle them off real quick. There's the Charleston Museum, which is actually America's oldest museum. It was opened in 1773, and it's still operating. So you can go there. Obviously, this picture here is not the original building. I think there are parts of it that are, or at least have been preserved. I'm not sure. I haven't been there. The other thing, which I mentioned earlier on, is called the Old Slave Mart Museum. And this is actually the same building that was used in the slave trade, and it has a lot of history about this slave trade and what was going on there. Definitely not something that's like a party atmosphere. Let's say if you've been to any place like this, or a Holocaust museum, it's important to learn that history and see what was going on, but it's not exactly exciting. I don't know how to put it, but we went up here and checked out the gates, and you could see some of the yard and stuff that's there. I think if you're into it, it's worth it, but definitely be prepared of what you're going to see. And then the last thing that I just want to point out, I think this is just like a southern thing. I've seen it in all the places we go, like Savannah, Charleston. They have what they call like the houses. Here's one example. The Nathaniel Russell House. So these are like big mansions that are hundreds of years old that are still preserved as either museums, or in a lot of cases people live there but will do like tours at certain times of the day or certain days of the week, and they just show you like these old-timey houses of the rich like plantation owners or whoever had them at the time, usually named after the original owner. So this would have been Nathaniel Russell's house, and you could see it. So that's just like a southern thing. If you go on a tour or anything, they're definitely going to point out, oh, this is this house. Look at the bars on this one. Look at the gate on that one. Look at the architecture here. This is why it's special. Or this guy shipped this from all the way over from Europe to have it on his front lawn. Like things like that, just kind of interesting. I would say if you're coming to Charleston, I definitely highly recommend that you stay within this area. There's a lot of hotels up and down, just like a street or two off of King Street. A lot of really nice options. If you're looking for something fancy and upscale, you're not gonna you're not gonna be short of options. If you're looking for a good deal, I will say that Charleston is pretty expensive, and I noticed the hotels are a lot more expensive than other places. Could be like seasonal as well. So look around. There's a few hotels further up north here near this bridge that I saw that were a little bit less pricey, but of course you're going to be maybe outside of walking distance, so it depends on what you're looking for. I think in Charleston, if you really want to do it, it's worth the extra bucks to stay around here if you can. That's my recommendation. And you're going to see on your list the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge, which is noted in a lot of places. It's a really, really cool bridge here. I'll show you. I'll put up some good pictures of it. I don't know that you need to necessarily go out of your way to drive over it, because pretty much anywhere in this area, especially when you're like walking around the water there, you're going to be able to see it. But it's a neat bridge. It's definitely pretty and something that's kind of a landmark of the area. I also noticed one other thing. I meant to mention this earlier when I was talking about hotels, but there's actually a hostel in Charleston, which is cool, because when I was in Europe and Asia traveling around, I would stay at hostels, and I love hostels, but the US, we just don't do them. I don't know why. Like, we have our Holiday Inns that are pretty cheap, but we don't have like real hostels. But once in a while you'll find one, and here's one in Charleston. So if you're looking for that feel, you could do it too. So this is another funny coincidence, just like the anniversary of the Fort Sumter battle. But here, this site here, the Broke Backpacker, which is pretty well known. They do blogs. They have a lot of writers. They just posted a new updated article a few days ago on Charleston, and I went through it as I was researching for this episode. And this is a very, very detailed, very good article. So if you're really into it and you really want to know more, they have like a 3-day trip here, and they go into a lot of different recommendations. I would recommend you check it out. They cover pretty much everything I've talked about plus more. It's a long read, but it's worth your time. Since we're already talking about recommendations, I'll go into my tip for this week. I always like to leave you with some sort of tip. Anywhere like this, I'm one who kind of does things my own way. I don't like to go on like the excursions and things like that. But when you find a town like this, where there's so many people that travel here, you really can find good tour guides, and I would recommend doing a real tour here. So when we went, we did a walking tour. It was like a food tour. They took us to a bunch of different restaurants. But as you go from restaurant to restaurant, they talk about all the different buildings and the houses that I had mentioned, and it's relatively affordable from my experience, and I actually haven't had a bad one yet. We started doing them after we went here, and I was really impressed. So I've done like the haunted tours, I've done like the food tours, just the walking tours. But most notably, the places like this that have good weather, where there's tourists coming all year round, you're going to find awesome tours, and you're going to find a lot of good deals. So I recommend, if you're coming to Charleston or Savannah or anywhere similar, you should definitely take a tour and sign up for one. It's worth your time. You'll see things that you could have walked right past and would have never known it was there. Now that we've covered some things to do, we've made it to the end of the episode. Well, I should say I've made it. I've had a little bit of a cold. I'm losing my voice, but I'm gonna make it to the end for you. So we're gonna finish out here. So I'm gonna go over my patented Goose rating, and then I'm going to tell you what I think about Charleston. So my goose rating starts with 1 goose. That means skip it. It's not worth your time. 2 gooses means, hey, you know what? If you're passing through or there's an event or a sporting event you want to see in that area, check it out while you're there. 3 gooses is going to be, hey, I recommend it. If this is your type of thing, go see it. If you're into history, you're into stuff like that, go see it. You'll like it. 4 gooses is, I'm recommending it. Should be added to your list. This should be a place you go. Whether you're into that kind of history or what I've recommended or not, I think you'll like it regardless. And then 5 gooses are my rare top choice picks where I'm going to say, like, this is the list, this is a definitive list. Today for Charleston, I think it's pretty clear. Been there twice. Both times had a really awesome time. I think people looking at the United States, if you ask them, like, describe like the different regions of the U.S., people will say Texas, people will say the South, people will say Florida, but people really miss the low country and they miss the coastal Georgia and South Carolina part of it. And I think that's super special. So for me, this is a really easy, very solid 4. I think most people would have an amazing time here. If you go on that peninsula, it's walkable, everything's there, there's a lot to see, there's history, there's new stuff, there's shopping, there's amazing food. You really can't go wrong. And I'll take it a step further. If you can do what we did and go to Charleston and Savannah on the same trip, that's a 5. I mean, that's a clear 5. This is such a special region, so much history. I mean, these cities are so old when it comes to the U.S. and have been around more than almost any other city you're going to go to. So you're just going to get such a great experience and such a unique view of our history and where we've come from. I really want to thank you for coming with me. We're already on episode 5. I'm having a great time. I hope you are too. I hope maybe in the first 5 you've already picked a place that you want to add. I will say this, if the first 4 didn't get you, this one is the one. You got to go to Charleston. So again, solid 4, had a good time. I'm looking forward to talking to you all again soon. So have a good one. Thanks.